Hello and welcome to another Zebra People podcast. Today I'm joined by Tom Scott, Nick Fine and Natalie Moser. I've chosen this group today because at some point or other in the past we've all worked together in various different forms. Today we'll be talking about the UX industry, changes we've seen over the past decade or so, and with that recruitment for the UX industry as well. My name's Nick Grantham. I'm one of the Associate Directors at Zebra People, and I've been in UX recruitment for over a decade now. Tom, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I've been in UX recruitment now for probably about 9 years. Feels like a lot longer than that, to be honest. I've recently just sold my business called Fearless, which is a design consultancy, and started a executive search design recruitment company called Verified, and we're about 7 weeks old. So.
Good. My name is Nick Fine. I'm a user researcher, and I've been doing this for about 12, 13 years. Public sector, private sector, agency side and client side. So been around the block. And I've worked for Ms. Natalies Moser.
Hi, so I'm Natalie. I'm head of design, head of UX, been doing it for over 15 years now, and currently at Tesco.
Great. Well, thanks very much, guys, for joining us. And as I said, we have all worked together at any one time in the past. We've obviously worked in the same company. I've had you out as a contractor. I've had you as a client. I've had you both together.
Eurostar.
Eurostar, yeah. I thought it would be a nice opportunity for us all to get the gang back together, get the band back together, and have a chat through highs, lows, changes within the market. And with that in mind, I guess I'm going to start with, what do you guys think has been the biggest change that you've noticed within the UX industry or recruitment in the last decade?
I'll let you guys start.
I mean, I can answer this one. It's been the fairly rapid descent away from user centricity. Because when I started in this industry a decade ago, we were fundamentally user-centric by process and by tool, by mindset. We were all of a similar ilk. And fast forward in 10 years, it's a completely rare mindset. And the tools and the processes are just not the same. And it's not UX, or it's not the same UX as the one we did 10 years ago.
What do you think would be, if you had to pin, I don't know if you can pin one thing on it, but if you had to pin one thing on it, what do you think that would stem from?
I think it has to have come from the rapid growth of UX, and when I say the lack of quality control, I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean the supply outstripped the demand. So demand outstripped the supply, and people were doing things and trying to do things and become UX that wasn't really UX, and that's frankly UX UI, and that, when it became the dominant paradigm, killed UX, or user-centric UX as we know it.
Yeah, that's it.
There definitely seems to be a general shift away from the importance of hard UX skills. There seems to be an emphasis on the design process, but not how you can apply that to what you do. So people seem to know the process inside out. You do this, then you do that, then you do the next. But they're not necessarily thinking about the importance of actually just thinking about all the different skills that you need to build up to add to your toolkit. And I think that's the difference. Too much emphasis on process, not enough emphasis on building up specific UX skills in your toolkit that you're going to need to apply. And as a result, people are just winging it.
I think we do, maybe a few of us might be responsible. We went through a phase of banging on about the process, because for a while we were getting UI, UX portfolios which just had those nice screenshots of what it looks like on an Apple Mac, what it looks like on a phone. And I know, we would encourage candidates to say, we need to see more process, So now there's so much focus on the process, but then it's the core skills that you think are lacking. But I guess once you know how to do the process, you can create a cookie cutter type of portfolio, right? This is your typical sort of layout. But what you're saying is that you think there's something else missing.
Yeah, all the IA skills, how to journey map, how to synthesize insight, all of these different skills that you need in order to then go and do good UX. Because the reality is there's never going to be the perfect process. Whenever you go anywhere, it will never work perfectly. So you have to know how to then adapt and flex to what the demands of the specific role are. So the process is kind of out the window. It's good to know it, but you need to know it to then deviate from it and start to apply these really important UX skills. And I think that's lost, or the awareness and the importance of that seems to have lost somewhere along the way.
And I think that's totally related to the lack of seniors and mentorship that's around, because people don't have the confidence to try or to learn new stuff. So they stay within a certain lane or a certain methodology that they're comfortable with. And they aren't given the opportunity to broaden their horizons, to build the toolbox. I've got a really rude or inappropriate image that I've drawn that I haven't posted yet. But basically it shows...
Sound like you.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically like an icon of a hipster, like the face, right? And I put that up at board level, or basically you got the CTO, or whoever the C-level hirer hires this head of design or head of UX who looks and sounds the part, is very much the art or creative director persona. And they're great guys and girls and everybody. They're amazing people. But that's what they think design or UX design looks like. And that person then hires in lots of mini versions of themselves. So I've got this huge thing which shows C-level hires in the kind of main hipster, who then hires in lots of hipsters into their own. And that's what you see.
Yeah. It's a snowball effect, isn't it? And then it trickles through. You get another candidate going to another company saying, I'm a UX designer. I've been a UX designer at this company. You should hire me because this is my pedigree. They hire that person. The same work gets done, perhaps lacking with the ROI as expected, and then it just trickles on and on and on. And then again, it's setting a precedent for this is what you should expect from a UX designer, because we've had this person come in and do it for us. And if you times that by a few thousand just in England alone, very quickly the market goes from overly saturated to overly diluted, perhaps. Well, what about some good things then? So obviously we talked about somewhere the dilution. What do you think could be something that's been really good within the UX market over the last decade?
I think the rise of the chief design officer role, so design being at the board level, I think is good for UX and design. So design is a true peer to product engineering, marketing, other business disciplines. So I think that's been a really interesting rise. That's been really good to start seeing like companies really invest in design, build really large teams, especially since I started in 2004. I think the BBC was probably the largest design team at that time. So that's been pretty good to see. But I think like chief design officers usually aren't from a UX background. Like often they're from like brand, industrial design, marketing. So I think we still have the same problem with like UX being sort of quite high up in organisations, whereas it's more like generalist design. So it's good and probably problematic as well, and a challenge for UX in particular.
Hopefully that will change.
Yeah, I think it will change.
I can't see how it does though, until we fix these other problems down here, so that people can ascend to a chief design officer with proper user-centric UX experience, so that they are then hiring the right people and building what good looks like.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? Instead of building what they think good looks like, which is what's happening fairly ubiquitously today.
I think the other good thing as well is, to be blunt, like the salary is a lot higher. So I think it's quite a lucrative career for a lot of people. But then again, the challenge there is a lot of people are getting into UX now because it pays well, not necessarily love the craft of UX, and paying money to go to boot camps, which I won't mention. But so it's good and a bit of a challenge.
Here's what I would really love to see. I would love to see a ton more accountability in UX, right? So that we can be paid more.
Yeah.
And when you fail, there are consequences.
Yeah.
There are penalties. Because I know what Natalie, her teams, people I've worked with, we know what we're capable of in terms of financial performance. Lots of people are still calling themselves this thing who aren't able to deliver that performance, and they're kind of bringing the whole industry practice down. So what I'd like to see moving forwards would be people who are accountable for these big calls, and also who win big but also lose big, because you should be able to put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
So with that, what I have seen in the last 10 years is actually a growth in that mindset of seeing that customer solving customer problems can actually drive business goals. That relationship has grown. So it's not looking at helping customers in one place, helping the business in another, and they could be in conflict. You are actually now starting to see how solving customer problems can actually make a tangible impact on the business and on the bottom line. And I think from a positive perspective, I think we're seeing that more and more now, which then goes back to ROI and how we can then ensure that we can keep growing in the right way.
I wonder, things like, there's no barriers to entry for a designer, right? Same with recruitment. There's no, you can get various different degrees or qualifications, but there is no barrier to entry to call yourself a UX designer or a recruiter who specialises in UX, really. And I wonder, perhaps in some ways that's a good thing. That's good for diversity, and it's not putting too many walls up against people who really want to get in it. But then with that, you'll obviously get a lot of people who aren't proper UX designers, who aren't proper specialist recruiters. I don't know if there's a way that we could initiate something to really validate people, they are who they say they are, and therefore there's more of a chance of them creating good practice in both sectors as a result.
There's such a problem with that, though, because the portfolio and interviews, they're meant to be those mechanisms, right? What has happened, and what we all see, is whether it's SEO or some kind of algorithm on LinkedIn, people are working to suss it out so they can game the system. And they're doing it with portfolios and interviews, and now with AI to interview prep. So it's this constant game of kind of throw each other out, or trying to not suss out how things work, or play the game. And it's just not authentic, and it's just creating so much headache for all of us.
So on that note, what do you think, if I know it's quite a big question, but what do you think needs to change to improve not only UX, but things like discrimination, dark UX,
Ageism,
I did a talk the other week where, I'm finding lots more clients who are really vocal about having a diverse team, and normally that reverts to background, colour, creed. Ageism is still rife. It doesn't get talked about enough.
Both ways.
It'd
be super diverse, but no age diversity.
So, and obviously that's another topic entirely. But are there things that you think should be happening, either from a recruitment perspective, UX perspective, that you think could improve the market?
Use specialist UX recruiters, to be blunt, to actually filter these people out that actually know what good UX looks like. Because internal talent teams are fantastic. They're good at they are good at filtering. Some really do have specialists, like Meta and JP Morgan have specialist UX recruiters. But before it gets to a hiring manager, have a proper filtered system so they're not wasting their time. And if you are, because a lot of our clients, for example, will be non-UX people, so they need our expertise to find them UX people. That's why they pay us.
I totally agree. I find it frustrating where you've got some clients at big companies, or any company really, who are then lumped with using their preferred supply list that they've adopted through the company, and then they'll get really generic responses. And I think personally, design leaders need to do more to try and really have a say in who they use to hire their teams. And I think a lot of the time where candidates slip through the net for hiring processes who really aren't as suited for the job as someone else should be, I think that's from recruiters who don't have the knowledge, who are sort of spamming their clients. In the cases where it's using a specialist recruiter, I think there's a certain amount of pressure there for a company to come through with results, especially if they know they're in competition with other companies. And that's where it becomes a numbers game, or who's in first game. And I think if clients can really make more of an effort to use a specialist recruiter, one specialist recruiter, brief them properly, go through the process properly, that will really start the process correctly.
I'd really like to see, and I've said this to you both before, but I'm saying it for the camera, to kind of the wider recruitment world, I would love to see more challenging of your clients. Now, I know that's a difficult position to be in, because your client says, I want X, and you'll say, well, you don't need X, you need Y. That's a challenge, I get that, and you don't want to fracture the relationship. It's a super important thing, I get it. But there are people who are asking for the wrong things, and so you guys are true recruitment consultants, right? You're not recruitment order takers, you're recruitment consultants.
Exactly that.
And I think there needs to be a bit more of that two-way, saying, look, UX is not a visual arts thing. It's not, you know what I mean? UX UI is limited and it does certain things, but if you want a wider UX thing that delivers value, i.e. what you're trying to achieve, you probably need this kind of a person.
I think that's where the relationships will come into play. So if you've got a hiring manager who has a good relationship with a specialist recruiter who can then advise that hiring manager, no holds barred, like you and I used to talk, Natalie, you know, at your previous roles, and I could give you some advice on, right, I think that rate might be too low, or I think maybe this might be, we might need to flex here, and you and I would have a really honest conversation about what's achievable, and I think that made for a really good process. But if you're someone that I'm having no contact with, I'm having to go all the way, or, you know, keep everything through an internal recruiter perhaps, or you know, it's just a very brief phone call or just an email, that rapport isn't there for me to be able to feel confident to go back and say, you know what, actually, I don't think that's the person you need or who you're going to get. We need to talk about this and flex.
For those that don't have access to a recruiter, the hiring manager, it's on the hiring manager to get people in, and they need to find out what
good looks like. And if they don't have a good understanding of UX, they need to find it out, because it's one of the most important things when it comes to recruiting, to understand what it is you need from the world and whether this person can help. So really, hiring managers have to really go the extra mile to really learn about UX and what that means, and the difference between UX and UI, and the difference between research and UI, and what a design system is. Actually spend time investing in understanding that, so that when you do go to a recruiter or you do interview, you can actually start to make much more informed decision about the right candidate someone could look like. So I think it's not just on the recruiters, it's on the hiring team as well.
Yeah. I also think some recruiters need to understand what the hiring managers are facing internally in terms of like political situations. You know, they want this, but of course every hiring manager wants increased budgets, but sometimes they just cannot get that. So recruiters who just send over, you know, top of the range candidates at high salaries, it's never going to work. So you need to have some sort of balance in the argument as well, because budgets aren't unlimited in organisations.
Tom, for your new verified search and selection, the executive search and selection business, how do you feel about somehow getting to educate the C-level who would be hiring this primary design role? Because when I say they're clueless, I mean that in a really positive way. It's not their world specifically, right? That's what I mean. They're just naive or inexperienced in the ways of our world. But that first hire, or that chief design officer, or whoever it is a most critical hire, because the entire pyramid is grown. So how can we...
Do you know what the most eye-opening thing is for me is, you know, speaking to chief design officers and chief digital officers and tech and product officers who are actually hiring these people, you know, CEOs, etc. I sort of ask the question, like, what's the first 100 days look like? They have, sometimes they don't know. But also a lot of the time they're bringing in design leaders without OKRs that are linked into the business outcomes. So it's almost like doomed to fail, because they're not going to have the right authority to actually impact what the non-design C-suite actually care about, which is, you know, financial returns, increased experiences and development and that kind of stuff. So those two things I think is the most important. I'll always like to know, what's the first 100 days look like of a design leader? Because I think that's super important in any role, to prove impact and also what the OKRs look like as well. Sometimes it's up to the design leader to go in and set their own OKRs, but I think they need to kind of have an idea what they're actually bringing this person in for. I actually made a post about this literally half an hour ago on LinkedIn. So those two things I think are really, really important. Also, the other thing as well, like a lot of brands in, say, FMCG always want people from FMCG. And I think a lot of companies conduct what I call like a vanity search. So for example, if you work in big tech, they only want people from big tech. I think that's pretty flawed. We've got to make sure we're looking at the person, what they've done, what they can bring. Not necessarily a fancy logo.
That's interesting, because I get that quite often, and I know we've discussed this before, where you've got a client, let's say they're an e-commerce client, and they want someone from an e-commerce background. And I guess that I get the peace of mind behind that, but if you're looking at a UX designer, user researcher, humans are still humans, whatever sector. You know, there's not drastic changes. So I do get that the fundamentals. Well, no, in fact, I get that there's the peace of mind of knowing that person's worked in an e-commerce environment before, or a financial environment before, and all that sort of familiarity. But in terms of the core principles, surely that should still be the same. So why is it that there's always seems to be this, or frequently seems to be this insistence on getting someone from the same industry? But then, surely that doesn't breed the variety that you should want from your solutions, right?
Often there's some really crappy hiring that goes on. Okay, I'll talk in general terms, but we'll talk about like our kind of broadcasty stuff, those kind of guys, right? Yeah. You know, there's a lot of promiscuous, or whatever you call it, incestuous hirings, because they're getting a view inside the competitor. And that's why there's often this race to the bottom, because they're just copying each other and nicking each other's staff, and it's just this very narrow horizon of stuff that doesn't really work, but let's try it in a different flavor, and it still doesn't work. And there's just a lot of that going on. Instead of innovation, trying stuff out, you know, having faith in the process type thing, they want to do it the quick and dirty way.
And you can always leverage, like, if you hire a team, make sure they've got e-commerce experience, so you can leverage your teams as well. You don't always need.
Yeah, sorry. It's so worth mentioning, especially for e-commerce, because I'm an e-commerce guy.
Right.
You're right about the principles and all the UX principles, and it guides all of us all the time. But in things like e-commerce, or maybe even fintech and that sort of stuff, there are really specialist things that you know and learn about that, about culturally, or as a practitioner working on a funnel. There are just ways of handling the funnel. Yeah. Also, you need to be able to take that responsibility on your shoulders and that conversion on your shoulders. A lot of people can't and don't. I mean, I've been with some very big seniors who really screwed up conversion through really inappropriate activity. Right. And if they were a true senior with e-commerce heritage, they would have been a much safer pair of hands.
That's interesting.
There is something about building up domain knowledge in a particular industry, but all domain knowledge is all learnable.
Exactly.
So from that perspective, I think that's okay. But I think what is important to impart to potential candidates is, well, finding out what are the initiatives that are being worked on at the moment, and hearing from them about what initiatives they've done that are quite similar, or there'll be crossover. So it could be that, for instance, we need somebody to come in to look at the home screen and change the home screen according to what point in the timeline a customer is. Somebody could have done that in a completely different industry, but they'll have the skills, the knowledge and expertise around all the thinking around that they can then apply to the initiative that the hiring team are working on. So there's so much crossover, and I think it's just important to understand what are the initiatives you're working on, and then what skills have you done in the past, or anything that's related that you can bring over, and you will always be able to find a bridge.
Well, and with that in mind, when you're hiring, is there any one single thing that stands out to you, and same with you, Tom, when you're looking at profiles or speaking to candidates? Is there any one thing, whatever sector you've recruited for in the past, but when looking at a UX designer, has there always been one thing, either talking to someone, looking at their CV, looking at their portfolio, that's made you think, this is someone I want to interview or hire?
There's probably many answers to that question, but one thing is how they have gone about learning methodology, techniques, and then applying that to their everyday job. Because that's how you sift out the people that have just winged it through their days, or been carried by other people, and those people that have really learned the hard skills and then tapped into the knowledge and expertise of others, and the theory and the methodology that goes with that, and then applied it into their everyday, or adapted it to their everyday.
And I guess you would look for that initially in their CV, and then ask it more in an interview?
Yeah. I'm going to jump in here because Natalie interviewed me, and it was the hardest and best interview I've had to date. And I'm not saying that for the camera or for Natalie. When you've got a head of UX, a hiring manager, who deeply understands the practice, she knows what she's asking, she knows what she's looking for, you just heard. She knows how to get that out of you. For me, that's the best kind of an interview, because it gives me the opportunity to pull out my stuff. There's no preparation needed, it's not stressful, it's just intense and lots of transfer, and it was great, and I wish more interviewing, or
and you obviously did a good job.
Yeah, I got hired, but it was but Natalie puts together good teams. That's a Natalie thing. So that's what you
expert recruitment help.
Exactly. Got great, and she knows what UX is. So those are two important things.
I think I sourced a few people as well, actually.
Yeah, you did. One or two.
Let's stop backslapping. Come on, move along.
What about you, Tom? What would you look for?
I think it depends on level. But in terms of, because I think we always need to be showing ROI of, UX and all this kind of stuff. I think people's ability to flip any conversation to talk about the ROI of UX, depending on what part of the business or who they're speaking to, I think is quite rare. So there's a lot of designers out there who are great at design, but they can't sell effectively what they do based on what that person cares about, which is often not design, it's an output of design.
Yes.
So they don't care about service blueprints, they don't care about fancy Miro boards.
Design
they care
systems.
they care about what, finance.
Yeah.
And, so I think that's a really underrated skill that people have.
Sure.
And that comes with being around proper seniors and leaders who actually know what they're doing and been there, done it. So,
I do wonder, in now or a few more years where we've had quite a few design leaders who've been fast-tracked into their leadership positions, probably off the back of the last 2 years where I think hiring was mental and lots of clients wanted to retain people or attract people in a really candidate short market.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of leaders out there who, rewind 5+ years would not be leaders right now. So that affects on the industry. We're looking at further dilution. Obviously, we've got product designers who have taken over a lot of UX jobs.
Yep.
I wonder whether the silver lining to that could be user research specifically as a standalone gig being more prominent, because you've got product designers, UX, UI designers doing the design stuff, but less so on the research side, which UX architects, UX consultants would once have had played a bigger part in before. Are we starting to see the death of UX, the rise of product design, but also at the same time the rise of user research? I think we saw also a rise in service design during COVID. Where do we see that going?
I think product needs to reform its shape, or it needs to kind of reassess its situation, right? It's been in the world for 3-4 years now in its current iteration, and it's trodden on too many toes and upset too many people, right? It's too broad. I'm going to talk in very general terms, but in the past 3-4 years, I've seen more product folk want to do their own research and do it shockingly badly and screw up multi-million-pound projects. There's too many people, I won't name names, who are talking about democratization and that kind of stuff of research. And in a startup and that kind of thing, great, fair play. But the vast majority of our world is not startup. It's not about the death of UX, it's about this thing that we call user centricity, or whatever you call it, and whether it becomes part of product design or design or whatever it is. But what we do, the user-centric nature of it, needs to exist, and because it delivers money. What they label it and how it fits in is all to be redefined, I think. Because it has worked. I just don't know if there are enough people who, like Natalie and I, in the world to share that knowledge fast enough. So the world's probably going to have to relearn it like we were 15 years ago. And it's going to be hard to watch, but this is where we're at.
And I think these days it seems like a lot of people are on the personal branding wagon now as well. So, on LinkedIn, recruiters, Tom, you're well known for it.
I mean, Nick is as well.
Nick as well, yeah. I do a bit. Natalie, not quite so much, but
we're dragging her into.
I'm pretty quiet on LinkedIn. I know, yeah.
But I get it. It serves a purpose not only from a sort of educational point of view or sort of trying to let people know what the score is, but for guys like myself and Tom, there's a lot of marketing essentially behind it. What would you guys say has been a sort of key to your success in that?
Just being honest.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Literally just being honest. Like this is why I speak. Like, for example, I always, at the end of every week at the moment, I speak to all these leaders in the week, record the insights, post it on LinkedIn, and just people want raw insights. They want real. LinkedIn now is full of, these are like 10
this great thing. Check it out. Yeah.
Like 10. These are 10 hacks. Life hacks. PS, sign up to my newsletter. PS, sign up to my podcast.
And I think your honesty, that that will go against, that's gone against you a few times, but I think overall you've gathered a good following because of it. And obviously when you're that honest, you're always going to upset a few folks, right? But if you're consistently doing it, you're still going to grow that following.
What I've learned over time as well is like, followers and all this, it's just purely vanity. I think like you want quality engagement and connections that can actually serve a purpose for your business or your community or something you're actually passionate about. Like, for example, I think a post of mine went super like viral. I mean, I think it was like 100 million views. Absolutely useless, pointless, pointless. Like and it just bombarded me like 5,000 messages a day. Couldn't actually get back to anyone that I actually cared about. It was actually a pain in the ass because LinkedIn actually commented on the post from their, and it's, they've got their own probably super algorithm for themselves. It was just really annoying. So I think there's a lot of vanity metrics out there, but something I have learned as well before Nick, you speak about it is a lot of the best design leaders do not have a personal brand on LinkedIn because they're busy doing the work. So I think...
Or LinkedIn is just so uncool.
Yeah.
If you're creative, a true creative, a real proper designer, what are you doing on a freaking corporate bloody social network?
Instagram or Twitter is better, but I think a lot of people are actually busy doing the work, and so people don't have time to.
Natty's the only one actually working amongst the three.
Yeah, exactly.
But I do go on LinkedIn because I follow a lot of people and get a lot of insight and knowledge. So it's super good for like knowledge and growing your awareness about trends and everything like that. It has a lot of benefits.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved as a platform, and it's definitely feeling more like a. I only use LinkedIn, really. I don't use, and like I'm on it at the weekend speaking to people. It's like it doesn't feel like just purely a work thing as well.
I was talking to this about my colleagues yesterday. I was trying to explain to them, I didn't set out to get a following.
No.
I never did. It's just that when the gold rush happened in 2014, 2015, and everyone started saying, we're doing UX, it's like, wait a minute, what you're doing isn't. I just started calling people out on it and saying, sorry, that's not UX, or that's not user-centric, or that's rubbish. Because I'm authentic, and that's what it's, and honest, I think people... They sense it.
People can relate to your problems because they're facing similar challenges.
I remember a few years back when there's a lot of UI designers transitioning to UI UX designers and then trying to become full-blown UX designers, and they were almost, for me, I almost saw them as the poor relation to UX. But if they mention UX and wireframes on their CV, they could get an extra 50 quid a day on their contract, or an extra $5,000 a year on their salary. And slowly but surely that started happening more. And if someone had to talk to me about their UI skills or shown me their UI skills in a portfolio, it really would have put me off. And now I'm finding myself going back to really good, thorough UX designers, asking them, tell me about your UI skills. Can you show a bit more of your Figma work in your portfolio?
Can I say something very quickly? Sorry. The real problem here is that back in the day, we were consultants and architects all in one, and then obviously for demand and split to research and design. In that split, obviously there's problems with resourcing and problems with what the UX is called, but in that split we've sort of lost the business consultant angle of UX. Right? It's become so about research or design. It's not even about research into design anymore, which is what UX ultimately is. But that business consultancy, that trusted advisor that the researcher or the UXer used to be, that quality is lost. And that's really where the value comes. It's not the fact that I can do good research or I can learn stuff or I can design cool stuff. It's when the business comes to me and asks me a thing, I've got an informed, valid opinion to give that's evidence supported.
I had another head of UX who's very charismatic, and she used to tell me she looks for geeks who can speak.
I know who that is. I know exactly that
but
is.
You'd be up there.
What the industry needs to do more of is build an awareness, especially at the senior UX level, of the fact that they need to take other stakeholders on that journey. You can't sit back and say, oh, we're in a top-down culture. It's on you to take them on the journey and actually to show them what a good experience looks like. And I think that experience gets lost, and it's all about usability and making the UI user-friendly. We need to sort of step away from that, although that's important. Think about what the experience is that's happening off screen as a result of the good UI, and then take others on that journey. And I don't think that's coming through enough in the industry. People are sitting back a bit and thinking that it's on everyone else, but actually no, it's on UX, it's on us to take everyone else on the journey and get them to think about things that they don't think about.
What are some ways do you think someone could do that or initiate that within a company?
It's people have to start showing others how customers are interacting with their products. They've got to see firsthand pain points. They've got to see where people are struggling. They've got to then talk about how confident are we that this is happening at scale. They've got to talk about what should be prioritised. They also need to talk about what customers are really enjoying that they should continue to build on. So not just looking at the pain points, but looking at the things that are doing really well and people are finding useful, and actually prioritising that in the roadmaps as well. So stakeholders have to see firsthand how customers are currently using those products, because otherwise blind spots build up and stakeholders start to direct the direction of a product without even consulting customers. And I'd say that's the first step, is just to expose stakeholders to customers.
That's interesting. I wonder, eye tracking software. I can't remember the last time I saw a brief looking for eye tracking software. Is that not a thing anymore? Or?
It wasn't.
Doesn't tell you how customers are, whether it's helping them solve their problems.
Right.
It's just telling them they're looking around the screen.
Yeah, it's just, it doesn't even, you don't even know that they're reading and focusing on where their eye gaze is. Those saccades,
daydreaming.
That'd be why I don't see it on briefs anymore then.
Yeah, no.
That's one good thing.
You know what, when that happened around 2013, 2014, the Toby, do you remember that Toby? Yeah, it was all that. It wasn't a thing back then. It was an agency spent money and said, look, we now got eye tracking, and
something they could sell to their clients. We've done eye tracking.
But in terms of the validity to a practitioner on the job, it's got a very specialist, very, very specialist application, not for general UX.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Verbatims are going to have more value than that. Actually, what people are actually saying about the product, what they might write as they're going along, whether it's any kind of feedback or anything, that's going to have more value than watching how someone potentially moves their mouse on the screen and where they look.
Yeah, and I guess, again, having the communication skill to get that true chat from the interviewees, again, is a skill on its own, right? As user researchers will do, as UXers do, as most designers should do.
Yeah, knowing how to uncover what's important to people, how it's useful without leading questions. Yeah, that's a skill.
Our industry lurches from trend to trend, right? Do you remember back there was the gestural thing? It was called .net. It was a thing, and you could actually do gestures in front of control your Mac or your PC by doing it. And around 2014, every agency, everybody was like, this is the coolest thing, this is going to change our lives. It's all gestural, and gestural was the big thing. And where are these things today? Right? They didn't keep on. You have to have the upper body strength of Hulk Hogan to be able to do that all day. It's not practical. But the point is, and then you've got design thinking, and maybe even a bit of UX UI. These kind of memes that get inappropriately hoovered up into the UX consciousness or digital consciousness. Many of them are either wrong or inappropriate or kind of short term. And that's the real problem with our industry. We're a real knee-jerky, trend-based industry. And things like UX and making money are longer term.
And I guess a lot of the time we have to react to that, right? We've got to be commercial and service those needs as they change. But if we had, in certain instances, more power to be able to go back and say, actually, I don't think you should change that, or I think you should incorporate this, perhaps we could also do a more consistent job of keeping the levels up, you know. But I'm going to go to some individual questions now. I'll start with you, Natalie. So you actually started off your career as doing UX and UI design before then going into a much more focused UX career. How did you find that transition, and what do you think of UX and UI designers now?
Okay, so I started back in the day just doing UI actually, and then early 2000s I went to UX London conference, and that was like having a curtain lifted up, so you could really see the importance of actually broadening out how you think about product development, and it's not just about making really good UI, it's about so much more. So that was a bit of a turning point. So you could start to see how it's so important to involve customers in your conversations, to think about all the different types of users that you need, and not to necessarily respond to sales requests about what you should do to the product, actually sort of thinking in a little bit more of a holistic way about how to prioritise product development. So it was a real turning point, that, and I was actually a contributor to Leah Bewley's book UX Team of One, and at that time I started to realise, as I was a UX team of one, how important it is that you need to, and it came through in the book as well, just start to introduce really small activities like empathy mapping, for instance, or journey mapping, and bring everyone in the team around that so that people can start to actually think, oh, hold on a minute, we do need to step back on this and think about the customer problems and not just get caught up with this great design. So my advice would be, if anyone is transitioning in from UI to UX and they need to bring other people in the organisation along, is just to start small. Find a really small UX activity that you can do. Get people in your organisation into a room and start to do small activities and gradually build up, because people will then start to see the value. If you just suddenly go in, helpful leather, change the process, everything straight away, people won't see the value. You have to do it gradually. So these kind of small things can really help to build up. So that's what
And what do you think then, with the market being so filled with hybrid designers, what do you look for now? Is there are you sort of cynical towards it, or are you positive towards it, given that's where you come from essentially? What are some of your thoughts on those candidates?
So I think about things through the lens of skills, and actually having a skills matrix in your organisation is a really important starting point to help potentially eliminate all of these issues that we've spoken about before. When you think about a role, you need to think about what are the initiatives that this person's going to be working on, and what are the specific skills in that UX spectrum does that person need? And then you hire through the lens of those skills, whether it's IA, whether it's research, whether it's exploration techniques. You need to think about that rather than a general, we need a UX designer, let's ask general UX questions and what their design process is. So that's how I would go about hiring. And the other advantage of skills matrix means that people inside the team know what they need to know. They may not know what they need to know, but this at least lays it out. This is what I need to do in order to go up a level. These are the skills that I need to build up. And so it creates a really strong structure for the team as well.
I remember actually you sending me some of the things that you'd be looking for specifically when you would do interviews, and I would try and be a bit discreet with what I let onto the candidates, so I couldn't just give them all the answers essentially. Maybe I gave you a few, Nick, I'm not sure. But with that in mind, what tips would you give to someone interviewing? Or what are you looking for? What would impress you in an interview from a designer, whatever background they have?
So as a tip, I would say one of the most important things you can do as a candidate is really find out before you interview what that role is about, why they need that role, specifically what the initiatives are that they're working on now, what they'll potentially be doing in 6 months if you know it, and then tailor your answers to that. Because UX is so big. If you go in and start talking about your experience with research and they need someone to help more with complex user flows, for instance, then you're going to miss a trick. So really going in on what the role needs, then your answers are going to really resonate with the hiring manager. And I'd say that's probably my number one tip, is finding out exactly what parts of the UX that role demands. And I think other things I think are really important are talking about, when you're talking about your past experiences, talking about the impact you made on those initiatives. Because what you hear a lot of is people saying, we did this, we did that. And of course you were part of a team and everyone is down with that, but we need to hear specifically what impact you made. And I think that can be a bit of a mindset shift for people. They really need to go after that, because otherwise you're just one of many people that are just in a big team, probably doing great things, but did you do any of that? Were you carried? So I'd say that's also really important.
With that in mind, obviously, it's in an interview as well, you want to be putting your best self forward. What if because I always think someone who can be really accountable and demonstrate accountability in an interview is quite a nice trait to have, and something that can be quite rare sometimes. If that person were to say, this is what I did, the impact, this was my impact, but actually some of that impact wasn't a positive impact, it was a negative impact, but I'm aware of it, this is how I think I should have done it next time, or should do it next time. How would that sit with you?
Well, I think that's really important. I think nothing works perfectly. We're in a very zigzaggy world. If you can reflect on what happened and actually say, if I'd done this, if I had my time again on doing it, I would do it differently. That shows that you're open to learning and evolving and actually recognising where things fell short. Yeah. So I think that's a real strength of character.
Nick, I'm going to go on to you. So you've recently, not too recently, a few months ago now,
2 months.
Gone in from a serial contractor into a full-time role.
Yeah.
How have you found that? And what I'm interested to know is, how has your influence changed from being a lead level contractor to now being part of the furniture? You know, do you feel like you've got a lot more say in what goes on?
That's an interesting shout, what being an internal versus the external, because the external thing is a two-edged sword. They will listen to you and they will ignore you in equal measures type thing, right?
And some companies use contractors like permalance, so you kind of perm anyway.
Absolutely. The permalance is a problem. What can I say? I think it's just about impact, right? And it's about communications. And one of the things that obviously I've needed to become is a kind of a show pony or a performer in order to be able to do my basic UX. And that's what you see me doing on social networks and at show and tells and at demos and at conferences. Because in order for us, four of us, to move the needle or to move us back into a beautiful UX world, it requires influence and persuasion. And that requires performance. So whether I'm a perm or a contractor, that performance quality, I think, remains. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It really does.
Well, what tips would you give to someone who wants to demonstrate that performance and instigate, you know, change or influence that should provide a better process? But you're a contractor, perhaps a contractor who doesn't have the same social presence as you. What tips do you think you could give to someone in that scenario?
So there's a very easy, clear formula for doing this. You show, don't tell, right? Because people buy with their eyes, and that's most important. I think I was telling somebody yesterday, I spent a lot of first 3 to 4 years of my career pointing the finger, telling people where they were wrong. That doesn't work. People don't respond to it. You don't get change. You put people's backs up and all of that. In the past 5 or 6 years where I've been really successful is kind of carrot, not stick, showing them what good looks like, role modeling. And that's where I'm getting into people's minds and hearts. That's where they go, oh, and I do wear the Dr. Nick hat because it opens minds and stuff. But you don't need that persona to be able to do that. It's about, Nathalie was talking about bringing the voice of the customer in front of stakeholders and everybody else. I make 2 to 3 minute show reels that I distribute around, and because they are low effort and they've got high production values. And by the way, Joel Gill, that all came from him back in the work that he does at Shell. He taught me awful lot about influence. And
so an actual like a deck that you're showing to your stakeholders.
Yes, absolutely.
Visual deck.
Either a deck or an MP4, like a video file that is 2 to 3 minutes long. And it's either on the intranet or attached to an email or something. The point is that they don't care so much, but they will care if it's short and bite-sized. They will make time, and they can get it. If you'd be like, here's a big deck with lots of words on it, forget it.
Yeah.
So it's really, if you can do that. And the other big tip is to do it regularly. So there is a fear factor and you will feel anxious about it. But the more you do it, it's like jumping out of an airplane type thing. The first time you do it, you're terrified, is the parachute going to open, all of that stuff. But after the 50th time you're doing flips and jumping out sideways, that's kind of where it's at. And the only way you can get to that level of confidence and competence is just by doing it. So volunteer for demos, town halls, that stuff. Be the show pony. Because the more you kind of fluff your lines and feel a bit, the next time it's easier and easier and easier until you're doing the flips out the door type stuff.
And I guess that will be good for the people who are really in it to do good work rather than in it for that fast track progression and money hike that we know happens in the industry.
And I have to say, being able to deliver money and value is obviously super mega important, but being able to influence in a world of misinformation is super important. And I think that's where I'm winning is the signal to noise ratio is so bonkers. If you can help make the signal stronger or reduce the noise, then you're part of the solution, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for that, Nick. And Tom, obviously you're a new company. You're focusing a lot more on leadership level hires, C-suite. How are you finding that? And what are you finding the C-suite are asking more so in terms of, where do they feel their budget should be spent?
As in the non-design C-suite or the design?
Or both.
But let's start with the fact that, so the new company is going really well. I think the market is definitely picking up for design leaders. I think at the start of the year it was super quiet, and I think we've definitely seen a culling of design managers, head of designs. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this as well, where the common theme and thread I'm seeing is non-design C-suite changes up here is causing havoc with design. So, a new CEO will come in, or, like a COO or chief digital officer or something like that. They'll have their own agenda, their own thoughts, and in a lot of corporate companies, they're always focused on the next quarter and bottom line. And so they can't see how design can infuse that business strategy sort of 1, 3, 5, 10 plus years out. So they basically just cut design. They move from a centralized function to decentralized. They all sit on designers will all then basically be execution designers under product teams. People leave. And so we're seeing a real big influx of proper chief design officers. People who've been in 30, 35 years, reported to CEOs, actually on the market for the first time in probably the whole career. So it's really interesting from that perspective. I think people who are doing really well, and there's a lot of roles out there as head of design, head of product design, or VP of product design, but often then there's a lot of inflated titles. VP of product design, for example, could be probably 5-6 layers away from the CEO. So they've got a ton of work to do. A lot of companies hiring in design leaders put them in the wrong part of the organization. No clear mandate as to what they've actually got to do.
Report to marketing.
Yeah. A lot of design leaders don't know what they could be fired for, which actually could potentially be a problem if a new CEO comes in. Not having OKRs linked to business metrics and this kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of obviously won't name names, but there's a CDO out there who is quite a well-known CDO, but came in and just actually didn't have that much impact and was over here, and it was almost like a vanity search. And then the company disbanded the role, and design now sits under commercial, which is interesting. So it's a very volatile market at the moment. I'm seeing there's also a rise in sort of fractional roles as well. I don't know if you've seen this. So, go to a design agency, go and do a brief. There's 3 weeks in your office, you come back, present it. Now they're basically the same team. They work very closely together. It's
more like a consultancy.
Yeah. And obviously all these big consultancies like your Wipro's, your Emphasis, they're all buying up design agency because they know it's so lucrative, and a lot of these companies are staff augmentation. They have thousands of people in banks and energy companies.
Cognizant Borzone, right? And that's just a small example of many.
Exactly that. Design is now part of Wipro. Fjord have finally disappeared and gone under Accenture Song, where they've got just a huge a lot of agencies. They all do great work, but that's the shift I'm seeing is less project-based engagements to more staff augmentation of your client. That was quite a thread at Fearless with a lot of our clients.
That's interesting.
That's quite a positive development in a way.
It is,
because it's showing that there's the importance of collaboration and iterating and doing, thinking about things holistically, bringing in different disciplines to create a product rather than here's something, let's launch it and leave it. So it does.
It is good. I think a lot of designers though that work at agencies don't necessarily like having to be on a client site 5 days a week. So they join the agency for the agency culture, but then they're actually over in Maidenhead 5 days a week. It's
it's interesting what you say though, Natalie, in terms of that outlook of consultancies or agencies where the depth of process has improved perhaps for more of them, whereas before you'd have a much smaller group of specialist consultancies who really did do good work, and then you had a whole wide array of agencies who really did this surface deep type of process and normally just bring in a few contractors when they had to do the UX bit. But now I feel like there probably are a lot more consultancies and agencies out there who really do a good level of process and do it properly.
Sometimes you find that designers actually want to follow through on a product.
Yeah.
So they don't want to get to that end point like waterfall style and then move on to the next. They actually want to have meaning in what they do, and that often involves seeing what happens when it goes live, learning from it and evolving it. So I think that could be something that's, if that's happening more and more, that's great. And I'm talking to candidates that want to move away from that kind of project-based work, deliver a big deck, and then move on to the next thing, and want to nurture a product.
On the other side, there is actually also a lot of designers who love being agency side, consultancy side, and traveling the world, going into these pitching, and
that's it. And I guess some agencies, consultancies will also have legacy clients where you will still get to work on projects end to end. But horses for courses, isn't it? So we were going to go through some questions that were mentioned on your LinkedIn post, Tom, but we're running out of time. So sorry to those who did post on there, but we will try and come back perhaps on a different episode. Guys, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I'd like to finish with any other points perhaps you'd like to make about the industry, recruitment, UX, that you think could be useful to those guys watching us right now.
I would say really important for anyone that's in UX, regardless of what level you are at, is to get a coach. So that really help you specifically with what you're working on at the moment or what you might be working on in the future. Because there's so much about, you don't necessarily know something until you're advised or coached. So getting a coach or a mentor and having that person there for you to help you build your career, I would say is fundamental.
That's really good advice. How about you guys? Any...
to all the companies out there trying to hire proper UX people, use a specialist recruiter that actually can filter the noise.
To follow on from Natalie's point about mentorship, not all mentors are created equally. And there are a lot of people out there who claim to be senior, claim to be a coach, claim to be a mentor, because it conveys to themselves a level of seniority and competence. It's so critically, it's what Natalie says is so critically important, but you have to learn the right thing from the right people. And so make sure you interview them, make sure they've got at least 5 years experience, make sure those 5 years are probably a bit diverse and around the place a little bit, not just you spent 3 years in one and 2 in the other. Do you see what I mean? You need a bit of horizon on that one. Because UX is all about the application and the context. And if you've only done it in a couple of different contexts, it's not great advice. You know what I mean? It won't build you or your mindset in the right sort of way.
Also, just on the mentee-mentor relationship is super interesting. I think as a mentee, take their advice on board or coach, whatever, action what they tell you and come back, because the most frustrating thing I can imagine for mentors is tell you to do something or have a great conversation. You don't hear from that person again. It's like, well, it's an hour of just, it's nice to give people advice and stuff like that, but to really build good mentee-mentor relationships, I think it's really important to show them that you're actually listening and actioning it. And this is what I did. This is how it failed. Like this might fail, but what are you thinking? Just
make it
build relationships.
Back,
relationships, everything.
Absolutely.
Nice. So I know we talked about lots of different things there, and some are perhaps a little bit more onerous to the industry, but some are positive, and there's still lots of different avenues we could be going over the next decade. So perhaps we'll regroup then and see how things are looking.
2033.
Hopefully I'm retired by then.
Fingers crossed. Well, thanks again, guys. Really appreciate that. And thank you guys for watching. We will be producing another episode very soon, so stay tuned for that one. In the meantime, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.